Have you ever wondered how far someone would go in search of power? Imagine a dark hall lit only by flickering candles. The air is thick, almost suffocating. Men and women, their faces hidden beneath black hoods, form a circle around a strange symbol drawn on the floor. In the center, a silver cup reflects the reddish glow of the flames. The sound of chanting in a forgotten language echoes off the walls, mixed with the rhythmic dripping of something that, from a distance, looks like water. But isn't. It's blood. This isn't a movie scene nor an urban legend. This ritual existed, and those who participated believed they were touching the boundaries of the supernatural, a pact with something beyond human understanding. A cult that promised power, immortality, and spiritual mastery, all in exchange for one thing, their own blood. But what really happened inside these secret ceremonies? What kind of people allowed themselves to be drawn into such dark promises? And most importantly, what was behind the man leading them? An enlightened prophet, or just a manipulator obsessed with the pain and faith of others? Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you. This story begins like so many others, with ordinary, lost people searching for answers. Men and women carrying pain, trauma, and a void that neither science nor traditional religion could fill. And it was into this abyss that a charismatic, mysterious leader emerged, with a gaze that seemed to see into the soul of his listeners. He spoke of spiritual ascension, of transcending the human body and awakening an ancient power dormant within each person. But there was one condition. Blood was the way. The first meeting seemed innocent. Lectures on vital energy, meditation, and faith healing. Gradually, however, the rituals began to change. The atmosphere became denser, the chants more intense, and the leader's words more radical. He said that blood was the link between the human and the divine, that through it one could free oneself from mortal limitations and attain true power. And each drop shed was seen as a sacred sacrifice, an offering to transformation. Have you ever felt drawn to something you knew was dangerous, yet irresistible? That's exactly the feeling followers described. Many claimed to feel an inexplicable force during the rituals, an almost palpable energy that made them believe they were participating in something grand. And the more involved they became, the harder it was to leave. The sect grew rapidly, attracting influential figures, occult scholars, and even public figures. Meetings became more secretive, and the leader began to be treated as a kind of messiah. His followers swore they had seen things science couldn't explain, instantaneous healings, visions, voices coming from nowhere. But the line between miracle and delusion is thin, and what began as faith soon turned into fanaticism. Over time, strange reports began to emerge. Disappearances, night-long rituals, and a secluded farm where, rumor had it, human blood was used as an offering. Authorities were unsure whether this was a religious cult, a macabre experiment, or something much darker. And this is where the story takes an even more disturbing turn. Because behind the walls where the blood was spilled, there was a secret that no one was ever meant to discover. Have you ever heard of a cult so powerful that it promised to turn blood into power? It wasn't just a metaphor, nor a distant belief. It was a literal promise, and for decades it attracted people from all walks of life, driven by the same ambition to touch the divine through sacrifice. What began as a small spiritual study group would soon become one of the most enigmatic and dangerous cults in modern history. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover now might surprise you. The history of this sect dates back to the early 20th century, in a small, isolated town surrounded by forests and surrounded by superstition. It was a time of uncertainty when science was advancing, but faith was still the emotional anchor of a world in crisis. Into this scenario, a man appeared. No one knew for sure where he came from. Some said he was a foreigner, others that he had been a priest of an ancient esoteric order. His real name was never confirmed, but his followers called him simply the Bearer, The holder spoke in a calm, hypnotic voice. He said that the human body concealed a forgotten power, dormant since the times of ancient civilizations. A power that could be awakened through a pact. And this pact, according to him, could only be sealed with blood. Blood would be the vehicle of enlightenment, the conduit between the mortal and the divine, between man and the primordial force of the universe. At first, his words seemed harmless, a discourse on self-knowledge and transcendence. But there was something about his presence that drew people in, something almost magnetic. He gathered people in makeshift halls, speaking about energetic balance, spiritual purification, and inner rebirth. Gradually, he began to propose rituals, small, symbolic gestures of surrender. A cut on the finger, a drop of blood on an ancient stone, an oath of silence. Have you ever wondered why certain people seem to seek danger when they believe they are about to find the truth? That's exactly what happened. The boundaries between faith and obsession began to blur. The group grew. First there were 10, then 50. Soon, hundreds of men and women traveled long distances just to hear him. Some sold their homes, abandoned their families, and isolated themselves from the outside world, believing they were participating in the dawn of a new spiritual era. Historical records show that among his followers were influential figures, doctors, teachers, even politicians. All were seduced by the idea that blood held the secret to transformation. Ancient letters discovered years later described nocturnal ceremonies held in caves and remote farms. Participants reported feeling an intense energy, a kind of ecstasy that made them believe they were witnessing something supernatural. The bearer claimed that by sharing his own blood, the disciple ceased to be an ordinary human. He became the vessel of truth, and anyone who dared doubt simply disappeared. Still, no one questioned. The promise of absolute power was stronger than fear. There are records of researchers and journalists who tried to expose the cult, but many of them also disappeared without a trace. Authorities, without concrete evidence, classified the movement as an alternative spiritual group. Only years later, when bodies began to be found in abandoned rituals, did the true horror begin to come to light. What intrigued everyone most was the unwavering faith of those who survived. Even decades later, some former members still claimed to have seen blood miracles, and that the bearer never died, only transcended. And this is where the mystery begins to deepen. Because this man's disappearance marked the beginning of a series of unexplained events that continue to this day. And that could completely change how we think about faith, power, and sacrifice. Do you believe that blood can be a bridge between the human and the divine? It seems absurd, doesn't it? But for the members of this sect, blood wasn't just a symbol, it was the very fuel of the soul, the key to opening invisible portals between the world of the living and the spirit world. They said that within each drop was a fragment of power, a spark capable of breaking through the limitations of the body and granting supernatural gifts. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because for them, blood didn't represent death. It represented rebirth, purification, transcendence, and it was based on this dark belief that all the rituals, symbols, and oaths of this sect were built. Stay with me until the end, because understanding what happened inside these secret temples is like slowly descending a staircase into the unknown. The deeper you go, the heavier the air becomes. The doctrine of blood, as they called it, was presented as a spiritual philosophy, a path to inner elevation. The leader, known among his followers as the bearer, claimed that blood was the original language of creation, the first pact between man and the divine. According to him, all life existed only because blood flowed, and only through it could one access the spiritual memory of the universe. Initiates learned to view the body as a sacred vessel, but also as an obstacle. They said the body imprisoned the spirit, and that only blood, when offered, could free the human being from matter. It was a powerful and dangerous idea. During ceremonies, The bearer led the faithful in chants that spoke of giving back to the cosmos what the cosmos gave them. Small cuts were made in the palms of the hands or on the chest, and the blood was collected in silver bowls, while everyone chanted mantras that they said activated the dormant ancestral power. Have you ever imagined what a person is capable of doing when they believe they are becoming something greater than human? Followers reported feeling an energy that completely overwhelmed them, a kind of ecstasy that made them cry, laugh, and tremble all at once. Some reported hearing voices. Others claimed to see lights or shadows moving on the walls. For them, these were signs that the ritual was working, that the blood had been accepted. The bearer said that those who fully surrendered themselves to the doctrine would reach 3 stages of power: revelation, communion, and ascension. In the first, the disciple awakened. In the second, he shared the sacred blood with others. And in the third, he ceased to be a man and became light. No record, however, shows anyone reaching the last stage. Only disappearances. The Sect symbols were engraved on the walls and even tattooed on the skin of the faithful. A circle divided by 3 lines represented the union of body, mind, and spirit, and in the center, always, a red drop. They believed this symbol protected against the forces of ignorance and that all blood spilled. Within the sacred circle would return to the universe as a power, but the most disturbing part of the doctrine was the so-called oath of the flesh, a silent promise that a member's blood would belong to the sect forever, even after death. Anyone who tried to leave was considered a traitor, and the fate of those who abandoned the group was rarely revealed. They said the blood purified, but in truth, it was only the beginning of the horror. Because as the cult grew, the holder began to demand more. More sacrifices, more surrender, more blood, and it is precisely at this point that the story takes an even darker turn, when faith and madness mix and sacred doctrine transforms into something that surpasses any human limit. Have you ever stopped to think about how far faith can take a person? How much can someone believe in something to the point of losing themselves completely, body, mind, and soul? What began as a spiritual movement, a quest for inner power and enlightenment through blood, would soon transform into something much darker. A path of no return, where devotion mingled with madness, and the sacred gave way to horror. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you, and maybe even disturb you. In the first few months, everything seemed under control. The sect's rituals followed a mysterious yet coherent logic within its own beliefs. Meetings were discreet, held at night under the flickering light of candles. The leader, the bearer, guided his followers with a calm voice and a serene gaze. He spoke of spiritual liberation, of purification through blood, and promised that soon they would all witness the great transformation. But what no one imagined was that this transformation would be accompanied by screams, disappearances, and death. The first signs that something was wrong began subtly. A disciple who never showed up for meetings again. A woman who left home, saying she was going to participate in a rite of passage, and never returned. Families received cryptic handwritten notes with phrases like, "Don't look for me," or "I was chosen." At the time, the police treated them as simple, voluntary disappearances. But what the authorities didn't know was that these people hadn't left of their own free will. They had been sacrificed, offered in the name of a power the leader claimed came from the other side. Newspapers of the time carried headlines that sound almost unbelievable today. Bodies found bloodless in the mountains, satanic ritual or secret experiment, the carrier cult, and the mystery of the missing faithful. Each new discovery left the population more frightened and fueled the darkest theories. Some believed the group was involved in ancient magical practices. Others claimed the blood was used for scientific purposes, perhaps linked to rejuvenation experiments or mental manipulation. But the most disturbing accounts came from those who managed to escape. One former member, in an anonymous interview decades later, said that the rituals had changed drastically. At first it was just a drop of blood. Then they started demanding more. They said the complete sacrifice was the ultimate test of faith. He described ceremonies in isolated caves where chants echoed for hours and the sound of drums mingled with muffled screams. According to him, no one ever left the same. Have you ever felt that strange chill, like someone is watching you in the dark? Many locals swore they saw hooded figures walking through the forests at night, carrying torches and metal objects. Others claimed to hear distant chanting coming from within the woods, followed by absolute silence. By the time the police finally decided to act, the cult had already disbanded. The holder had vanished without a trace, taking most of his closest followers with him. What remained were ruins, blood-stained underground chambers, symbols carved into the stones, and ritual objects no one could decipher. Even so, the disappearances continued for years. People with no connection to the sect began disappearing from the region. Some researchers believed that small groups of survivors had kept the rituals secret, following the ancient doctrines of the holder. To this day, there's no definitive explanation, but some say the cult never ended. It simply changed its face, spreading in small branches around the world. And according to rumors, some of these groups still perform rituals where blood is seen as an offering, and sacrifice as the purest form of devotion. And this is exactly where the mystery begins to deepen. Because what seemed like just an isolated case of fanaticism would soon reveal a much larger web of secrets, with connections no one had ever imagined. Do you believe that every evil empire one day reaps its own collapse? Every lie, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually crumbles under the weight of truth. And that's exactly what happened with the blood cult, a cult that promised supernatural power but ended up surrounded by chaos, betrayal, and death. What began as a doctrine of faith and transcendence crumbled under revelations that not even its most faithful followers could bear. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you and show you just how blind faith can become a deadly weapon. For years, the holder seemed untouchable. He was the prophet, the chosen one, the man who claimed to speak to invisible forces and lead his followers toward enlightenment. No questioning was allowed. His eyes, always cold and calculating, conveyed a mixture of authority and serenity. But what no one imagined was that behind those calm gazes lay a manipulator who used fear, blood, and devotion as tools of control. The fall began silently, a small crack in a castle built on human despair. One of the followers, exhausted from so much suffering, decided to record what was happening within the temple walls. Pages and pages of accounts followed, sacrificial rituals, abuse, disappearances, and the bearer's true goal to accumulate power and wealth at the expense of the faithful's total submission. When this diary reached the authorities, an operation was hastily mounted, but what happened that night would never be forgotten. It was dawn when dozens of police officers surrounded the site. The property, isolated in a dense forest, seemed asleep. No sound, no light, only the sound of the wind cutting through the trees. When they entered the main temple, the scene they found seemed straight out of a nightmare. Blood symbols on the walls, ritual objects scattered on the floor, and an altar covered in dark cloths. The metallic smell in the air betrayed what had happened there. Have you ever felt that shiver that runs through your body when something is wrong, but you don't know what yet? That's what many officers reported upon entering the hall. In the center, they found the followers kneeling, motionless, as if in a trance. The bearer stood among them, calm, eyes closed, holding a silver cup in his hands. When one of the officers ordered him to surrender, he simply smiled and said, "Blood renews itself. You can never stop what is already alive." No one knows exactly what happened next. The official report states that there was a confrontation and that the leader was killed, but versions vary. Some say he was struck and fell onto the altar, disappearing before everyone's eyes, as if the ground had swallowed him. Others swear that his body was taken and hidden by remaining members of the sect. What is known is that no trace of his body was ever found, only the cup with dried blood residue inside. The sect was officially dismantled days later. Authorities seized documents, symbols, ritual objects, and even recordings of the ceremonies. The images were disturbing. Blindfolded men and women chanting as the leader walked among them with a blade in his hand. It was the end of the promise of light and the beginning of the revelation of horror. But even after the fall, something strange continued to happen. Nearby towns began reporting the emergence of new groups, small and discreet, but using the same symbols and phrases as the old cult. It seemed that somehow the sect had spread like a virus, invisible, silent, surviving in the shadows. And it is precisely here that the story takes an even more disturbing turn. For although the police have declared the case closed, some say the holder never died, and that in places forgotten by time, his disciples still await the right moment to bring back the cycle of blood. Do you believe that evil truly disappears when exposed? Or does it simply change form, waiting for the right moment to return? Decades have passed since the collapse of the blood cult, but the marks it left live on, in abandoned ruins, in the memories of survivors, and in the legends that still circulate among residents of the regions where it all happened. Authorities have officially closed the case, but the truth is no one has ever been able to fully explain what happened there. And perhaps they don't even want to. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you. The remains of the main temple still stand, shrouded in vegetation and silence. Those who approach speak of a strange sensation, a heaviness in the air, a chill that doesn't come from the wind. Some say that at night, distant chants can still be heard, like echoes of a faith that refuses to die. The sect's symbols remain engraved in the stones, resistant to time, and the oldest residents avoid approaching. For them, that place is not just a memory. It is an open wound. But the most disturbing are the testimonies. Former members who survived, few and all scarred, report that even after the cult's collapse, they still feel callings in their sleep. One of them, interviewed years later, said something that still chills me to this day. He's not dead. The holder still speaks to us. He just changed his voice. These words, recorded in a documentary that was never shown publicly, reinforced the suspicion that the end of the sect may have been just the beginning of something bigger. Have you ever had that feeling that certain stories don't end? They just change scenery? That's exactly what investigators discovered when they followed the clues left by ancient followers. In different countries, groups emerged using the same symbols and repeating fragments of the original chants. They were small, secret cells that presented themselves as spiritual brotherhoods, but whose doctrine concealed the same principle as the original sect: blood as a bridge to the divine. In addition to the new cults, mysterious documents began to surface, diaries, tapes, old recordings that seemed to detail even more elaborate rituals than those uncovered by police. Some of them contained drawings of humanoid figures, described as beings of crimson light, and notes that spoke of an imminent return. None of these materials were officially authenticated, but the contents were enough to fuel dozens of conspiracy theories. Explanations vary. Some believe it was nothing more than an extreme case of collective psychological manipulation, a social experiment conducted by someone who mastered advanced persuasion techniques. Others, however, swear there's something more than human at work in this story, something science still can't explain. According to them, the holder discovered an ancient spiritual practice dating back to lost civilizations, where blood was used as a catalyst for vital energy. But perhaps the most disturbing point is this: in practically every location where the cult's symbols have been found, police reports point to new disappearances. People who simply vanish without a trace, as if the cycle were repeating itself. Coincidence, or a sign that the cult was never extinguished. And it's at this point that the story ceases to be just a tale of fanaticism and becomes a reflection on what human beings are capable of in the name of faith, power, and the unknown. Did those people truly believe that blood would purify them? Or did they know something we still don't understand? The mystery remains alive, pulsing between the lines of every account, every ruin, every unconfirmed theory. And most disturbing is the thought that perhaps the bearer was never just a man, but an idea. An idea that has spread, and maybe closer than we imagine. What if I told you that maybe this cult never really ended? That somewhere in the world, at this very moment, someone might be repeating the same words, drawing the same symbols, and letting the same drops of blood fall onto the cold ground, believing they are touching the power that transcends the human. Scary maybe, but also fascinating, because the line between fanaticism and faith, between the sacred and the profane, is much thinner than we like to admit. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear now could completely change the way you view power, belief, and fear. After so many decades, the echoes of the cold-blood doctrine still resonate in obscure forums, in secret internet groups, and even in new spiritual movements that swear they have been reborn from the ancient truth. Some deny any direct connection to the original cult. Others openly admit to following its principles, saying that blood is merely a symbol, a metaphor for vital energy. But among the shadows, there are those who believe the rituals continue exactly as before, hidden, silent, kept alive by those who never abandoned their oath. Have you ever had that strange feeling that certain stories never really end? The sect may have been dismantled, the leader may have disappeared, but the idea, that one, yes, remains alive. Because ideas are harder to destroy than people. And this one, in particular, found fertile ground in the human heart. The desire for power, control, and transcendence. Some investigators claim to have found recent evidence, symbols identical to those used by the group at current disappearance sites. Ancient mantras translated and posted in gated communities with detailed instructions on how to renew the cycle. Even reports of secret ceremonies in forests and abandoned warehouses. Coincidence, perhaps, but the similarity is too eerie to ignore. What's most intriguing is that in all these cases, there's a pattern. People seek more than reality can offer. Power, status, healing, meaning. These are the same motivations that gave rise to the original cult. Generations change, names change, but the impulse is the same. The eternal human attempt to surpass one's own limits, even at the cost of what is most sacred, one's own blood. What if this cycle had never really been broken? What if, behind all the stories of disappearances and secret societies, there was a single truth that always returns, disguised in new forms, new beliefs, new leaders? This is the most disturbing part. When evil reinvents itself, it ceases to be a vestige of the past and becomes part of the present. Now stop and think. How many times have you heard of rituals, occult orders, or mysterious pacts that promise absolute power? Is it a coincidence that so many different groups repeat the same symbology, the same phrases, the same gestures? Or did they all draw, literally or metaphorically, from the same dark source that began with the blood cult? What you'll discover next might make you see the world differently, because the scariest stories aren't the ones that stayed in the past. They're the ones that keep happening right before our eyes, disguised as normality. What if this cult had never ended? What if, somewhere, someone was still shedding blood for power? If you enjoy true stories about cults, crimes, and mysteries that defy logic, subscribe to the channel now. Turn on the bell so you don't miss the next episodes, and tell me in the comments, do you believe that power through blood is real, or is it all just collective madness? What if the power that so fascinated this sect was still alive, feeding on our own curiosity? Perhaps that's why stories like this never die, because deep down we all feel that silent shiver when something touches the inexplicable. And it's precisely this mix of fear and fascination that keeps the mystery alive, even after so many years. But now I want to hear from you. How do you feel when you hear this story? Do you believe it was all just fanaticism? Or do you think there's something deeper, something that science and reason can't yet explain? If this topic resonated with you, leave your opinion, theory, or even an experience that made you doubt reality in the comments. Reading your thoughts helps keep this conversation alive. And who knows, maybe through your words we'll find a new clue, a new perspective on all this. And since you've made it this far, please leave a like. It may seem like a small gesture, but it shows that this type of content resonates with you and helps the channel reach more people who, like us, are driven by curiosity about the unknown. Each like is a sign that it's worth continuing to explore stories the world has tried to bury. And of course, if you want to follow me on this journey through cults, crimes, mysteries, and dark secrets that defy logic, subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is a new descent into the depths of the inexplicable, and I want you with me every step of the way. Your participation here is what keeps all this going. It's what gives voice to forgotten stories, keeps the flame of investigation alive, and makes this community grow, a community that seeks to understand what most prefer to ignore. So comment, like, subscribe, and stay with me until the end, because there's still much more than what was revealed. The blood may have dried, but the mystery that continues to pulse. Have you ever felt the air suddenly change, as if something invisible was watching you? The room is almost completely dark, lit only by candles, dancing to the rhythm of a wind that shouldn't be there. A circle is drawn on the floor, traced with a thick, dark mixture. Around it, hooded figures move slowly, murmuring words that seem to come from another time. The sound is deep, repetitive, hypnotic. In the center, a silver cup rests on a symbol carved into the wood, and the silence that precedes the next step seems to scream within the viewer. Then a drop of blood falls. Then another. The sound, soft and rhythmic, is almost musical. And as the red liquid spreads across the drawing, the tension grows, the air grows heavy, and something shifts within each person present. It's as if the blood has a life of its own, as if that simple gesture opens a rift between what is human and what lies beyond. No one there seems scared. On the contrary, there's a strange gleam in the eyes behind the hoods, a look of belief that they're witnessing something grand, almost divine. And yet, there's something profoundly wrong about the scene. Something that defies logic, morality, the boundary between faith and insanity. The sound of the chants grows louder. The leader's voice echoes firm, charged with authority. He speaks of rebirth, of liberation, of blood as the primordial language that connects humanity to the universe. His words seem to penetrate deeply, dissolving doubts, erasing reason, and it is at this moment that the question arises that echoes to this day. What would lead apparently normal people to shed blood in the name of power? Some say it all began with a promise of transformation, that behind the rituals there was a search for something we've all at some point desired, to understand what lies beyond the visible. To break the limits of ordinary life, to escape the feeling of emptiness, and perhaps that's what makes this story so disturbing, the fact that it says more about us than we'd like to admit. These people weren't born monsters. They were parents, children, students, ordinary professionals, all driven by the same flame, the desire to find greater meaning. Blood for them wasn't violence. It was faith. It was surrender. It was the price of enlightenment, transformation. In their minds, happened through pain, and the deeper the cut, the closer the revelation. Imagine for a moment being there, surrounded by people who believe so strongly in something that doubt seems to vanish. The sound of the ritual fills your ears, the metallic smell of blood permeates the air, and the sense of presence is so strong that it seems impossible to tell if what you feel is real or just a reflection of fear. This is how fanaticism is born, when the desire to believe overcomes the instinct to flee. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what seemed like a mere ritual of faith hid a complex structure, a meticulous manipulation of minds and emotions. The leader didn't just offer power, he offered belonging, a refuge for those who felt lost, forgotten, and voiceless. He knew exactly what to say, how to look, how to transform fear into devotion, and once inside the circle, no one could get out. This is the darkest part of the human journey, when the desire for answers mingles with the fragility of the soul, when the promise of a hidden truth becomes more seductive than any rational evidence. It is a dangerous path, because those who walk it begin to believe that the end justifies the sacrifice. And sacrifice in that temple had a name, a smell, and a color. Reports say that during the rituals, lights flickered, the air grew thick, and some claimed to hear voices, not human, not of this world. For the faithful, this was proof they were being watched by the ancient gods. For those on the outside, it was a portrait of a collective mind in collapse. But what if there was something beyond madness? What if what they sought, this power through blood, was a metaphor for something deeper? A desperate attempt to break free from the shackles of the world, to prove that there is a hidden power within each of us. The line between faith and obsession is thin, and once crossed, there is no turning back. As the leader raised the cup, everyone knelt. The sound of the chants grew louder until they were almost deafening, and amidst the chaos, there was a kind of dark beauty, a disturbing harmony between devotion and destruction. It's difficult to watch this scene, even in the surviving descriptions, without feeling something strange stir within. Because deep down, every human being has been tempted to believe in something greater, something that justifies the inexplicable. And that's precisely where the danger lies. When the search for meaning becomes a prison, and what should be sacred becomes a justification for what is unacceptable. The blood cult was born from the desire to transcend, but what it found was only the cruelest reflection of the human soul, one that feeds on fear, control, and the illusion of power. The blood spilled in that temple may have dried, but the symbol it represents continues to pulse within history, and who knows, within each of us, because, in the end, this story isn't just about them. It's about what happens when faith loses its way, and the desire for transformation turns into madness. Comment here. That makes sense to me. They say all darkness begins with a small spark of light. And that's how this story began, with a man who claimed to bring answers, healing, and power at a time when people desperately sought meaning in life. It was the early 20th century, a period of great change, when science was advancing too rapidly and traditional faith was beginning to lose ground. People were confused, torn between what they could prove and what they still wanted to believe. And it was precisely in this chasm between reason and mystery that a man emerged who seemed to have all the answers. They called him the Bearer. No one knew for sure where he came from. Some said he was European, others swore they'd seen him in ancient esoteric schools of the East. There was something hypnotic about his presence, a kind of calm that made people lower their guard, as if his mere voice could heal wounds no one else could reach. He spoke of energy, of destiny, of a hidden truth that united body and soul through blood. And most impressively, he didn't ask for faith, he promised results. The speech was seductive. According to him, blood carried the essence of creation, the primordial power that sustained all life. And whoever learned to master this energy could access higher levels of consciousness, heal their own bodies, and even manipulate the reality around them. Blood is the language the universe understands, he said. It is the code that unlocks the doors of the invisible. It was a promise too tempting to ignore, especially for those who had already lost hope in ancient religions. The first meetings took place in simple houses, rented halls, and later on remote farms. The group grew quickly. Ordinary people, doctors, teachers, clergy, artists, all wanted to meet the man who claimed to have discovered the secret of true transformation. There was something almost theatrical about his lectures. He always entered dressed in white, with an iron medal hanging around his neck, and spoke of purity, light, and sacrifice. For him, blood was not a symbol of death, but of life in motion, the conduit that connected the human to the divine. His closest followers described him as someone with a gaze that seemed to pierce one's soul. They said that standing before him was like being naked inside, as if he saw every thought, every fear. He didn't shout, he didn't impose, he simply persuaded. And by the time people realized it, they were already inside something they didn't fully understand. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what truly made this man so dangerous wasn't what he said, but what he made people believe about themselves. He made them feel special. He convinced them they were part of a unique journey, a greater purpose reserved only for the chosen ones. And once someone believed this, they came back every day seeking more. More answers, more power, more belonging. Soon, what had been merely a series of spiritual encounters became an organized structure, with hierarchies, codes, symbols, and oaths. There was an inner core, made up of the oldest disciples, and an outer circle, with new members who aspired to reach the level of communion. Everything was carefully controlled: clothing, gestures, even the words used in daily conversation. The holder claimed that true power could only manifest in those who purified themselves of all influences of the ordinary world. Interestingly, the first official reports about this group appear in newspapers of the time, described in an almost neutral way as an alternative spiritual community. In one of them, a reporter wrote, "There's something fascinating about their meetings. There's no violence, no preaching, just silence, discipline, and a faith that seems to infect even the most skeptical." But what no one knew was that behind the scenes, something much more intense was beginning to happen. Later testimonies from former members reveal that in internal rituals, the faithful made small cuts in their skin, allowing the blood to drip onto symbols engraved in stone. They believed this gesture connected them to an invisible force and brought them closer to the promised enlightenment. The bearer called them the children of the bridge, and said that the more blood they shared, the stronger the bond between them and the divine center. As the months passed, the rituals became more elaborate. Meetings were no longer public. New members were accepted only by direct recommendation from someone already initiated, and all were required to sign an oath of absolute silence. The bearer began to travel, taking with him a small group of followers who accompanied him on mysterious pilgrimages. Each city he passed through left a trail of curiosity and fear. Some said he cured the sick, others that he summoned spirits, but the detail that stands out in the historical records is the psychological impact it caused. People reported radical changes in behavior. Previously, skeptical men and women began abandoning their families, selling properties, and dedicating everything to the movement. They said that contact with the bearer made time seem different, as if an energy were present that altered their very perception of reality. This was the seed of something much larger, something that would spiral completely out of control. And perhaps the scariest thing isn't what happened next, but what sparked it all in the first place. Because deep down, what the holder offered was something every human being craves on some level: meaning, a purpose that explains the chaos, a promise that there's more than ordinary life. And that's what made him irresistible, the idea that blood could be the key to liberation, the physical proof of a spiritual truth. He knew that when a person believes they're faced with revelation, they don't question it. They surrender. The cult grew silently, crossing borders, inspiring other movements, and planting the same ideal in different parts of the world. The bearer became an almost mythological figure. For some, a misunderstood messiah. For others, the architect of one of the most dangerous cults ever recorded. But the truth, to this day, remains shrouded in mystery, hidden in diaries, letters, and accounts that have never reached the public. And this is where the line between faith and manipulation begins to blur. Because what seemed like mere spirituality began to reveal a much more sophisticated system of control. a psychological game that turned believers into instruments, followers into servants, and devotion into absolute power. Comment here. I'm on that journey too. What would you do if someone told you that the secret to spiritual enlightenment lay within your own body? That the key to eternity wasn't a prayer, a behavior, or a belief, but your blood? That was the promise the cult made. And thus begins the blood doctrine, one of the darkest and most disturbing beliefs ever to exist. According to his followers, blood was not just a vital fluid. It was the essence of the soul, the invisible link between the human and the divine, the channel through which all the spiritual energy of the universe flowed. They believed the human body was an imperfect vessel, a prison, and that by spilling blood, they were releasing something sacred, a spark that brought them closer to the ancient gods, to forces that existed before humanity itself. The leader, known as the bearer, said that blood carried ancestral memories, that each drop carried within it fragments of creation. He asserted that by manipulating this energy, man could transcend the limits of the flesh, rewrite his destiny, and achieve a kind of power no religion had ever dared to promise. And in a way, it was precisely this boldness that attracted so many followers. It was the promise of transformation, of mastery, of a hidden truth that only a few would dare to touch. Rituals were the heart of the doctrine. At first, they were simple ceremonies of meditation and chanting in forgotten languages, accompanied by small symbolic offerings. But over time, these ceremonies became more intense, more physical, more dangerous. The bearer said that each drop of blood offered was an act of faith, a way of giving back to creation what it had given. Purity comes from surrender, he repeated, and surrender demands sacrifice. The symbols used by the sect were complex, composed of spirals, triangles, and lines intertwining like veins. Some represented the flow of life energy, others the balance between life and death. There was a central symbol, the most sacred of all, a circle divided into 3 parts, with a single red drop in the center. It was called the bridge seal. For them, it was not just a drawing. It was the physical representation of the connection between man, the cosmos, and divinity. During rituals, the symbol was drawn on the ground with red paint, and sometimes, reportedly, with human blood. The bearer conducted the ceremonies with a disturbing calm. He wore a white robe, spoke in a low, almost whispering tone, and asked the faithful to repeat his mantras. Blood is the light. Pain is the path. Flesh is the veil. It was a mixture of mysticism, emotional manipulation, and collective hypnosis. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because what truly sustained the blood doctrine was not just a belief in power, but a sense of belonging. Within the sect, each person believed they were part of something greater, something the world would never understand. They called themselves the awakened. The rest of humanity, they said, lived asleep, prisoners of illusion. And when someone believes they hold a truth others do not, the line between reason and fanaticism blurs. This mentality shaped every aspect of the followers' lives. They came to view blood as sacred, untouchable outside of rituals. Some stopped eating meat, others stopped associating with unpurified people. The bearer forbade his disciples from speaking to family or friends who questioned the teachings, saying that doing so would corrupt the body's energy. Gradually, they completely isolated themselves from the outside world, immersing themselves in a parallel reality where faith and fear intertwined. Accounts from former members describe a heavy, almost electric atmosphere within the temples. The walls were covered in symbols. The smell of iron was in the air, and the silence, a silence that seemed alive, as if the place itself were watching. There was a specific moment in the ritual called the hour of reflection, when everyone was supposed to look at their own spilled blood and see the spirit freeing itself from matter. Many said that at that moment they saw lights, figures, vases, and believed that these were signs of divine approval. But what no one knew was that the holder used these trance states to completely control the group's emotions. He understood the human mind with surgical precision. He knew the exact moment to raise hope and the right moment to introduce fear. He said that doubt was an impurity that needed to be purified with more blood. This was the core of the doctrine, a blend of promise and terror, power and submission. There was also the oath of the flesh, a silent pact that marked the faithful forever. It was the point of no return. Those who made it cut their own skin and let the blood fall on the seal of the bridge, swearing eternal loyalty to the bearer and the cause. The spilled blood symbolized spiritual birth, and each new member was rebaptized with a new name chosen by the leader himself. From that moment on, they ceased to be people and became instruments. The contrast between the spiritual discourse and the dark practices was what made it all the more frightening. To the outside, it seemed like a common religious group, perhaps eccentric but harmless. Inside, it was a theater of psychological and physical control. And when anyone tried to leave, they discovered that the bridge between the human and the divine had come at too high a price to be broken. Many believed until the end that blood truly purified. That pain was merely the gateway to liberation. But the truth was otherwise. Each ritual bound them further, slowly destroying what remained of their identity and humanity. The promise of spiritual ascension turned into blind obedience, and the life-giving energy that was supposed to bring power served only to fuel the leaders' thirst for control. They said, "Blood purified." But in truth, it was just the beginning of the horror. Comment here. That makes sense to me. At first, it seemed like just another isolated community. People came seeking peace, healing, meaning. Smiles were exchanged. Chants echoed through the halls, and the holder walked among them with the same serene gaze as always. Everything seemed harmonious until they began to disappear, one by one, silently, without a trace. The first disappearances were dismissed as coincidences. Some said the members had reached the next spiritual level and, as a result, withdrawn from the material world. Others believed they had gone on secret missions, chosen by the leader himself. But the victims' families told a different story. They spoke of confusing letters full of coded phrases and an inexplicable feeling that something much darker was happening. From then on, the air of purity began to fade. There were whispers, tense looks, and the certainty that something was stirring in the shadows of the doctrine. Blood, once a symbol of enlightenment, now seemed to exact a price. Former members report that the nightly rituals became more intense, almost violent. The holder said that the spiritual cycle needed to be fed, and that total surrender could only occur when body and soul fused in sacrifice. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this is where the line between faith and madness finally blurs. When the promise of power turns into blind obedience, and what was once devotion turns to terror. Police reports from the time describe a sequence of events that resemble scenes from a nightmare. Isolated farms, abandoned temples, symbols painted in blood on the walls. There were records of hastily interrupted rituals and traces of fire in places where, supposedly, the most advanced ceremonies were performed. One investigation even found fragments of clothing and personal belongings of some of the missing people mixed in with charred remains. The report ends with a short, almost bureaucratic yet chilling sentence, "Unidentified human material." Meanwhile, the sect continued to grow. Police tried to act, but the group always seemed one step ahead. Witnesses claimed the carrier had informants within the authorities themselves, and that operations were leaked before they even began. Some investigators reported political pressure to close the case, citing a lack of evidence. But journalists who dared to pursue the leads discovered something even more disturbing. Powerful people were involved. Business people, intellectuals, and even public figures secretly attended the rituals, lured by the promise of power and spiritual rejuvenation. The climate of fear spread to neighboring towns. At night, Residents claim to hear chants coming from the forests and see strange lights dancing among the trees. Dogs barked incessantly, and some hunters swore they had found altars hidden in clearings, covered in scars and bones. The newspaper, The Voice of the North, published an article with the title, "The Cult of Blood and the Mystery of the Missing Faithful," and in it he described details of a ritual discovered after an anonymous tip. Reporters found, in the center of the altar, a circle of stained stones and a silver chalice with dark residue. When one of the journalists questioned a former follower, he heard a response he never forgot: "They didn't die. They were absorbed by the light." This phrase, repeated countless times by different witnesses, became the symbol of the collective insanity that dominated the sect in its final months. What's most striking is how all of this was sustained by a mindset of absolute faith. For his followers, there was no crime, no loss, only transformation. The bearer taught that physical death was an illusion, that true liberation occurred when the blood left the body. And somehow, he managed to make people believe this with a conviction that defied all logic. Some survivors say it was common to lose track of time during the rituals. The voices, the lights, and the constant sound of drums created a kind of collective trance. "You'd forget who you were," said a former member in an interview decades later. "It was like something took over. Before you knew it, you'd be on your knees, blood dripping from your hands." The most macabre turn of events occurred when one of the leader's closest disciples was found dead under mysterious circumstances. The body was in a ritualistic position, surrounded by symbols painted in red. On the wall, someone had written a phrase, "The sacrifice is complete." The case was hushed up, but it aroused suspicion even among the followers themselves. Many began to question what really went on behind the ceremonies. That's when the carrier tightened the rules. No one could leave the sect's territory without permission. No one could question it. Fear became as prevalent as faith. Documents from the time show that families tried to rescue their relatives, but rarely managed to contact them. The sect's properties were protected by guards, and local authorities claimed they had no jurisdiction. Silence was bought, the truth was suppressed, and the more the world tried to understand what was happening, the deeper the cult sank into its own abyss. In later interviews, one of the researchers confessed that he still dreams about the images he saw. "It wasn't just the blood," he said. "It was the look in their eyes. The people we encountered there had a hollow glow, as if they were no longer fully alive." This statement, published years later, further fueled theories about what really happened within the rituals. Some believed the holder was using mind manipulation practices, combined with sleep deprivation and suggestion techniques. Others swore he had discovered an ancient form of ancient magic, a kind of forbidden energy ritual. The fact is, no one could explain how so many people, from different backgrounds and intellectual levels, had allowed themselves to be so deeply carried away. And that's where the most disturbing part lies. It wasn't just an isolated sect, but a manifestation of the most fragile part of the human mind. The need to belong, to believe, to feel part of something greater. The blood was just the symbol. The real sacrifice was freedom itself. The investigations continued for years, but the trails dissolved like smoke. The holder disappeared. No body was found, no culprits were convicted. All that remained were rumors, ruins, and a sense that something still pulsed behind those walls. And perhaps most disturbing is the thought that, even after all this, there are those who still believe he fulfilled his promise. Transcendence through blood. Comment here, that makes sense to me. The holder's empire began to crumble in the same silence in which it had been born. For years, the blood cult grew like a shadow, invisible to the world but fueled by promises of power, transcendence, and redemption. But like every carefully constructed lie, all it took was a crack for everything to begin to crumble. And the curious thing is that this crack didn't come from without, it came from within. One of the oldest disciples, known only as Helena, was the one who decided to break the cycle. She had been one of the first to follow the holder, a woman of unwavering faith, completely devoted to the doctrine. But something changed when she witnessed what she should never have seen, a ritual that didn't end like the others. That night's sacrifice surpassed the limits of what even the most faithful followers could accept. It was there, in the echo of muffled screams and the metallic sound of blood falling onto the cold floor, that Helena realized that what they called purification was nothing more than control, manipulation, and death. For months, she lived in silence, pretending to still believe, watching from the sidelines, until she managed to escape. Bruised, exhausted, bearing scars that would never fade, she sought help, and was the first voice to break through the wall of fear surrounding the sect. Her words lit the fuse for one of the largest police operations ever recorded against a spiritual cult. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what happened next shows how the truth always finds a way out, even when it's buried under layers of terror. The investigation began in secret. Undercover agents posed as those interested in joining the sect. There were months of recordings, nocturnal meetings, and a network of informants that grew with each new revelation. What they discovered was far worse than they imagined. There were hidden documents, meticulous records of every member, every ritual, every sacrifice, spreadsheets with dates, names, and locations. The bearer treated the faith as an experiment, and his followers as guinea pigs. The intercepted messages revealed a clear pattern. He planned to expand the cult to other countries. There were plans to open temples in strategic locations, where the government had little influence and religious laws were more flexible. Blood, he said in one of the letters, was the universal currency of the soul. The operation to dismantle the cult was planned like a siege. On a moonless night, dozens of police officers and agents surrounded the main property, a former farmhouse used for the most secretive rituals. Inside, all was quiet. The candles still lit, the chants still echoing. When the doors were broken down, what they found looked like a cross between a temple and a laboratory. Books in ancient languages, symbols engraved on the walls, cups, blades, and in the center of the room, the main altar covered in dark cloths. Helena had said the holder would never fight, that he believed himself untouchable. And that was exactly what happened. When they found him, he was serene, sitting, wearing his white robe, with the same calm gaze that had enchanted so many. He offered no resistance. He simply looked at the agents and said, "You're too late. The blood has already been spilled." But what happened in the following minutes remains a mystery. Officials' accounts differ. Some say he was taken away unharmed, arrested and questioned. Others claim that while being escorted, he began to laugh, a low, almost whispered laugh, and before they knew it, he fell to the ground, dead. No sign of injury, no apparent cause. The medical report describes sudden cardiac arrest, but some believe he simply ceased to exist. After the operation, the site was completely sealed. The government collected all the material found, books, diaries, recordings, and archived it under seal. Officially, the sect had been dismantled. Unofficially, rumors continued to circulate. Some claimed that some of the followers had managed to escape. Some smaller temples remained active in other countries. And strangest of all, in isolated communities, new groups began to emerge, repeating the same words, using the same symbols, and speaking of a rebirth of blood. The psychological impact of the fall was devastating. Former members reported months of intensive therapy, recurring nightmares, and identity crises. They had believed so deeply that they lost the ability to distinguish reality from illusion. Some still defended the bearer, claiming he had been betrayed by impure disciples. Others, more lucid, spoke of how they were slowly dehumanized, deprived of sleep, food, and freedom, until fear and faith became one. The revelations shocked the world. Newspapers ran serials, and television programs explored every detail of the story. Psychologists, theologians, and criminologists tried to explain how one man could exert such power over so many people, and the answers were never unanimous. Some said he was a genius at emotional manipulation. Others said there was truly something supernatural about his presence, but what intrigued everyone most was the lack of a body. The officers who witnessed the alleged death swore they saw the corpse being taken away, but somehow the body disappeared during transport. No official records were found. No complete medical report was released. It was as if the holder had evaporated from existence. The very man who promised transcendence had become its very symbol. The cult's downfall was treated as the end of a nightmare. But the truth is, the silence that followed was even more disturbing. The properties were abandoned, the investigations closed, and the holder's name erased from public records. However, people began reporting strange visitations, figures in white watching houses at night, anonymous letters sent to victims' families, and even apparitions described as identical to the missing leader. Years later, a recording found by chance rekindled the mystery. It was an old tape, marked only with the Sect's symbol, the divided circle with the droplet in the center. The recorded voice was unmistakable, that of the holder himself. He said calmly, "You think you've trapped me, but no one traps what has already transcended. Blood is eternal, and the cycle has not yet ended. Since then, the case has become a mixture of fact and myth. Some believe the recording is fake, part of an attempt to sensationalize. Others say it's authentic, and that it was recorded after the alleged day of death. What happened to the holder remains one of history's greatest spiritual and criminal enigmas, a hidden truth that still challenges those who try to understand the limits of faith and human manipulation. And perhaps, in the end, the most frightening question isn't what he did, but what he awakened in all who followed him. Comment here. That makes sense to me. Years have passed since the sect's collapse, but the marks it left remain vivid, like scars that time refuses to erase. The ruins of the ancient temple remain hidden amidst the forest, silent, covered in moss and oblivion. Those who dare approach speak of an inexplicable sensation, a sudden chill, a malaise that arises out of nowhere, as if the air grew denser, heavier. Some describe sounds that shouldn't be there, distant murmurs, light footsteps, and the echo of something seemingly breathing between the broken walls. The government has never officially confirmed the site's total destruction, and some swear that the underground corridors are still intact, hiding records, symbols, and remnants of ancient rituals. Most intriguingly, even after the cult's collapse, reports of activity continued to emerge. Former members claim to have received letters with no return address, always handwritten, with a single sentence: "Blood doesn't dry." Some even reported encounters with people who seemed to know intimate details of their lives, details that only someone within the cult could know. Most of these victims never spoke publicly, but the stories spread through forums, independent investigations, and homemade documentaries. It was as if the cult had disappeared, but its essence lived on, fragmented into small cells scattered around the world. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what remained after the collapse wasn't just destruction, it was a legacy of fear, trauma, and mystery. Those who managed to escape or simply survive carry to this day a mixture of shame, guilt, and confusion. Many lost everything: family, identity, purpose. A former member, interviewed decades later, summed it up well. He said, "When the bearer fell, we fell with him. We were trapped between two worlds, the world of faith that died and the world of truth that never arrived." This phrase echoes in every record, every testimony, every recovered document. The frightening thing is that even after so many years, no one has managed to fully understand what really happened. Theories abound. Some believe it was all nothing more than a psychological experiment, an experiment conducted by powerful individuals to study human behavior in the face of faith and fear. Others argue that the cult accessed something real, an ancient force that escaped everyone's control. Investigators working on the case report too many coincidences to ignore. One of the agents, years after the operation, stated in an interview, "There were things we simply couldn't explain. Machines would fail inside the temple, Radios would crackle for no reason, and people would look at us as if they already knew what we were thinking. These types of reports were officially dismissed, but they fueled a new wave of conspiracy theories. Behind the scenes of these investigations, some files remain sealed to this day, classified as sensitive material. They are believed to contain recordings, photos, and reports that have never been made public. The reason? According to authorities, the content was too disturbing for release. This decision only reinforced the myth. Some say that among these files is complete footage of one of the final rituals, a black and white recording in which the holder appears standing, looking directly at the camera and saying something in an unknown language. After this sentence, the tape ends abruptly, and this is where stories that blend reality and superstition emerge. Local residents say that for many years, no one wanted to buy the land near the ancient temple. Some workers who attempted to demolish the site reported unexplained accidents. One interviewed in 1989 said, "Every time the machinery touched the rocks, something burned. The machine stopped and the smell of iron filled the air." The press treated it as mass hysteria, but the reports of mechanical failures were real. The psychological impact was also profound. Universities and research groups began studying the survivors, trying to understand the level of mind-washing they had been subjected to. They discovered that many exhibited the same symptoms: insomnia, voices, visions, and a constant feeling of being watched. Science called it post-cult syndrome, but among former members it had another name, the call. They believed the cult hadn't ended, that the holder, alive or not, continued to influence their minds. And this belief curiously spanned generations. Young people who had never lived through the cult's era began to take an interest in the myth. Websites and forums dedicated to the cult began to emerge, some simply discussing theories, others reproducing parts of the doctrine. Videos featuring symbols and chants reappeared online, always accompanied by an enigmatic message: the cycle starts again. This reignited the debate about how far an idea can die, because perhaps the true power of the holder was never blood nor fear, but the mindset he left behind, a mindset of absolute surrender, of blind pursuit of meaning. And once such a belief spreads, no prison, police, or government can contain it. There are also researchers who believe that the holder was involved with older secret societies, and that the blood cult was merely a modern offshoot of an ancient cult. They base their theories on similar symbols found in temples in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Interestingly, in many of these places, there are records of rituals that also involved blood as a spiritual bridge. This suggests that the holder may not have invented anything, just awakened something that had always been dormant. But what most intrigues those who study this case is the emotional impact it continues to have. Decades later, any attempt to revisit the story awakens fear, repulsion, and, at the same time, fascination. It's like looking into the abyss and feeling it stare back at you. The sect may have been destroyed, but what it represents still resonates. It represents the limit of human faith, the point at which the desire for transcendence turns into submission, and where the search for light ends in darkness. And it's impossible not to wonder, did they truly believe all that? Or did they know something we still don't understand? Perhaps the answer lies between the lines of the stories, in the ruins that refuse to disappear, or in the minds of those who never managed to completely free themselves. Because in the end, the cult may be over, but the mystery surrounding it still pulses. And some say that blood, when offered in faith, never ceases to call back that which was once invoked. Comment here. I'm on that journey too. What if everything we've heard so far was just the surface? What if the blood cult had never truly disappeared? Just changed its face, its name, its time? This is the question that still haunts researchers, scholars, and even ordinary people who swear they've felt this cult's presence in some way in the shadows of our society. Because the truth is, some ideas are like seeds. Even after being burned, they find a way to sprout again in another place, in another body, with the same essence. Again, in another place, in another body with the same essence. There are recent discrete reports scattered across different parts of the world. In remote regions of Eastern Europe, entire communities swear they've seen symbols very similar to those used by the ancient sect. In South America, residents of isolated villages speak of secret ceremonies held at night, where strangers appear dressed in white, with candles and cups in their hands. None of these reports have been officially verified, but the pattern is always the same. The circle, the chanting in an unknown language, and the offering of blood. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what's most intriguing isn't the fact that the sect might have survived, but why so many people are still drawn to it. Even after so many revelations, the horror, the crimes, and the deaths, there are those who continue to believe that the bearer wasn't a charlatan, but rather a man who discovered something the world wasn't ready to comprehend. The idea that blood is a bridge between the visible and the invisible lives on, crossing borders and centuries, like an echo that refuses to die. Some scholars call this the abyss mentality, the impulse that drives humans to seek power where no one else would dare look. It's the same instinct that has driven alchemists, occultists, and visionaries throughout history. They believed that true knowledge is not found on the surface of things, but in that which demands sacrifice. And in a way, it's precisely this kind of thinking that keeps the cult alive, even if only as an idea. Some also say that part of the bearer's legacy has been absorbed by other modern spiritual doctrines. Lectures on vital energy, groups that speak of transcending through essence, books that blend science and spirituality, all offer, in disguised ways, fragments of the ancient doctrine. The difference is that now it is sold as self-knowledge, not devotion. It's the same principle, just adapted to our time. Behind the scenes of these new practices, there are names, symbols, and phrases that directly harken back to the original cult. Phrases like "the flesh is the veil" or "energy flows in sacrifice" appear frequently in courses and communities that present themselves as harmless. Coincidence, perhaps? But the pattern is hard to ignore. The blood has drained from the ceremonies, but the concept of total surrender lives on, now in the form of mindset, behavior, and a relentless search for something that gives meaning to the void. This is where the most disturbing part of this story comes in, the psychological impact left by all this. Because deep down, the blood cult doesn't survive only among its former followers. It survives within anyone willing to push the limits of what is human in the name of power, faith, or transformation. This is the hidden truth that few realize, that the danger lies not only in those who lead, but in those who believe without question. Contemporary researchers analyzed the recordings left by the sect and discovered something that seemed impossible. One of the tapes contains an extremely low-frequency sound, barely perceptible to the human ear, but sufficient to alter the mental state of those who listen to it for a long time. This type of sound manipulation could explain the collective trance of the rituals. But some argue that science cannot explain everything, that the sound was merely a channel, an invitation to something much greater. In online communities, the legend of the bearer has gained new strength. He is portrayed as a figure who never died, merely transformed. In secret forums, users claim to receive messages signed with the same symbol as the ancient sect. Some report recurring dreams with rituals and voices repeating the ancient phrases. Others claim to have been called, and use these experiences to justify new spiritual practices based on symbolic blood, such as superficial cuts made in energy purification rituals. The point is that myth and reality are intertwined. The holder has become more than a man. He has become an idea, a representation of what human beings are capable of when they believe they are faced with absolute truth. And perhaps this is the most dangerous point, because ideas don't die, they just change form. Some scholars see this as a metaphor for human behavior itself. They say the story of the blood cult is a mirror. It reflects our desire for control, our need for answers, our inability to accept life's limits. It is a journey of transformation, yes, but a distorted transformation, shaped by fear and obsession. When we look to the holder, perhaps we are actually looking at the most extreme reflection of what we all silently carry. The desire to understand the inexplicable, to touch what lies beyond, and it's impossible not to wonder, what if all this is still happening, far from the eyes of the world? What if, in some forgotten place, someone is still repeating the same words, tracing the same symbols, believing they can become something more than human through blood? History shows us that power always attracts, and that the promise of transcendence is perhaps humanity's oldest trap. The cycle may have changed form, but the ritual remains the same. In temples, in secret groups, and most importantly, in the minds of those still seeking an answer the world cannot offer. Comment here. That makes sense to me. If you've made it this far, it's because this topic touched you in some way. Perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of mystery, or perhaps because deep down you also sense there are truths the world prefers to hide. And that's why I want to invite you to continue this journey with me. Here, each story has a purpose: to provoke, reflect, and reveal what normally remains in the shadows. So, if this kind of content resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss future episodes, and will continue diving with me into stories that challenge what we think we know. And of course, leave a like. It's a sign that this kind of conversation is worthwhile. And it helps me keep this search for answers that few have the courage to undertake alive. Oh, and I want to know who actually stayed until the end. Write in the comments. I'm with you until the end. I want to see who is part of this group that doesn't shy away from the darkest questions, but chooses to face them head on. There's a video here that complements everything we talked about today. Click and continue with me there. The next story may be even more disturbing, and perhaps reveal something you never imagined.